will standardized tests count against students? And I know this is a question raised by a ton of students in the registration form, as test optional policies have raised a lot of questions, especially for the UC schools, Drew at UC Berkeley, who have really pushed this policy. If they don't submit it, will it kind of portray as, oh, my SAT score is bad, and so I don't want to submit it, or will like it just not count? Since I kind of touched upon like UC Berkeley has really pushed this policy, I would go to Drew first.
Yeah, sure. I think for us, we're a little different, and probably a little different maybe from our colleagues, even though we may have the same policy at UC Berkeley and actually the University of California system as a whole. We are, and we call it at Berkeley, test free. So basically, we are not considering the SAT and ACT at all. We do not see it in the process. It's not a part of our consideration in admissions, for scholarships, anything. So that's been a big shift. Now, AP exams, IB exams, if you took SAT subject exams before they were suspended and you have those, yes, you can share those, but they're still not mandatory. But for the SAT and ACT, yeah, they are not a part of our process. And honestly, when we made the shift, my colleagues and I, we didn't really see a big difference because the test score didn't make or break our decision before we shifted to this, which is why we were excited that we made it official for now. I will say that policy will stand through 2024. So and then we'll reassess at that point. But I'm positive that it'll probably be a permanent change. But that has definitely been a big shift. And I think kind of attached to your previous question, dealing with kind of misconceptions, I had to tell a lot of students, and I think a part of why our numbers went up as far as application numbers this past year was due to our testing policy shift. That's okay. What I tell students is that just because we're taking away of one piece of the puzzle is still there, and it's a lot that we still consider. It does not make us any less selective. And to understand that, we're still going to look at you holistically. It is still a very selective process. Please know that, all right? And understand you still have to bring your full self to this process. And I think that's the most important part to understand. And to your point, Benjamin, understanding that do not get bogged down in the stats, all right? If you're even looking at test optional school, see what the average score is or talk to that school or whatever to understand the stats, you know them, and then move on. You need to focus on doing your job, your part, applying and bringing your authentic self to the process. You know we're selective. That's a fact. Keep it moving. And so I thought that was a really great point, Benjamin, and goes along with the whole standardized testing. And I think part of why we definitely went test free, because again, to take that obstacle out of this kind of formula or this kind of process for our students who are applying.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's next go to Janessa.
Sure. It's kind of interesting, kind of ebbing and flowing a little bit with standardized test scores. Here at Wake Forest, we've been test optional since 2008. And so it's been a permanent policy for us for a while and will continue to be, but it's also really interesting to see how it has been affected by the pandemic as well. And also kind of a little bit of my experience as well, working at another institution that went directly into test optional during the pandemic. And so it's kind of interesting to see both sides. One of the pieces that I encourage you, just as Drew mentioned, is really thinking about the fact that in the absence of test scores, there are still other pieces of the foundation that are there. I always like to equate it to a pie because I'm very Southern and I bake pies, I eat pies, love all the pies. The foundation of your application is your academic achievement. This is what's going to support you throughout this process. And honestly, and depending on the selectivity of institution, that crust or that foundation is going to be pretty thick in that way. Now that could insert, standardized test scores, whether that's the SAT or ACT. It could be AP scores, IB scores, or subject tests for those of you who may have taken them. But the part of the process that's still really important is what you're putting inside the crust. That's the difference between a peach pie and a chicken pot pie. Like Those are two different pies. And they're both really great in my opinion, but those may be two different schools, two different programs, different scholarship levels. And so really think intuitively, just as Jua mentioned, about bringing your full self to the process, but also recognizing that yes, academic achievement is the foundation, but there are so many other things that fill out your application in the holistic process. Sorry, I just made y'all hungry. I'm hungry.
No worries. Awesome. Let's go to Mary.
Similarly, I work at an institution where we've been test optional since 2005. And so it's very much ingrained in our process of how we evaluate students. I think the thing here is if you're working with a test optional school, just what Jua and Janessa said, look at their averages, think about what your test scores look like, but it's not just about your test scores. It's about your test scores in relationship to the school that you're applying to's averages, but also in relationship to what your transcript looks like. And so your school counselor might be a really good resource to talk about that because they know what your transcript looks like and they can talk you through whether or not to submit test scores. Your admissions counselor at all of these different schools, if you wanted to have a conversation about that, I think all of us would be open to having that conversation with you about our particular school and submitting test scores or not, and kind of the philosophy around it. But where I work at St. Lawrence, if you don't submit test scores, it doesn't hurt you in any way. You're still, fully considered just on the basis of the application that we have in front of you. We're not making assumptions at all about why you don't have test scores or what those might look like and why you chose not to send them. We know that there are a lot of reasons why you might not want to send us your test scores, and they're all completely valid and completely legitimate. And having been test optional for so long, I think that's something that we've really worked on in our office and our reading process, and it's something that is deeply ingrained for us.
Awesome. Matt.
I love those answers so far. And if we had another hour, I think we could, as a panel, break down our concerns with standardized testing overall and what they do and don't measure in students. Mary, I want to say I'm adding dodecahedron to my college admission bingo sheet. And Janessa, I just want to be your best friend now. So from now on, be on the lookout. On this question, though, we're going to go a different direction than my colleagues. University of Georgia, the state of Georgia, our Board of Regents are requiring us, have told us we are requiring the SAT or the ACT for applicants this year. Our colleagues in Florida are in the same situation. We've got to have them. Now, that we require a standardized test, an SAT or an ACT score to apply is not the same as it's the most important part of the application. And that's a distinction that's important, I think. When we're trying to make up an academic picture of you as a student, we're looking at a lot of things. We're looking at your grades, we're looking at your grade trends, we're looking at your curriculum, what you took given what was available to you at your school. For us, those things are really important. And then your SAT or ACT score is a distant third to those two things for us in understanding your academic abilities and what you've done so far. And so will standardized tests count against students? Well, at Georgia, you've got to send them or you can't apply. So that, but the other way of saying, that we don't value them as much as other things is to say, and I'm sure my colleagues have this, every year we have students who apply with perfect SAT or perfect ACT scores. They haven't taken hard classes. They haven't done well in those classes. They don't do things outside of them, but they crushed it in a standardized test. We don't admit those students. And they're always flummoxed because they say, well, I've got a perfect SAT or ACT score. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for all these things, and nowhere in our holistic process does it say high SAT score.